Tonight, I'm taking you somewhere far away, to a place where enormous stones were stacked like bricks, where life looked nothing like our own, so different, in fact, that even our imagination can barely reach it. An age when the sun was worshipped as a god, when water was sacred, and when time moved not in a line, but in a circle, the Aztec Empire. But tonight's journey is not just a history lesson. This is something slower, something quieter, a gentle kind of travel, the kind that lets your mind empty, lets the weight of the day fall away, and carries you softly into sleep. So if you'd like, shift into a more comfortable position. You can close your eyes, take a slow, deep breath, and let it go. This story was not written to excite you. It was written to help you sleep. So the words will slow down from time to time. Some sentences will repeat. Some moments will last a little longer than they need to. That is intentional. It's so your mind can ease into rest without resistance. And before we begin, a small reminder. If these kind of videos help you unwind, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. If you feel like leaving a comment, I'd love to hear from you. Knowing where you're listening from and what time it is for you keeps me going and keeps these stories coming. Now, if you're ready, we are walking slowly toward a great city. A city built on a lake, rising from the water on stone, sitting at the heart of the Valley of Mexico. Each step is heavy. Each step moves deeper into the past. Each step brings you a little closer to sleep. Think about this for a moment. What sounds exist around you right now? Maybe a car passing outside. Maybe the wind. Maybe nothing at all. But back in that age, in that city, the nights held only the sound of water, the gentle flow of canals, the soft movement of the lake, and far in the distance, the great fire burning at the top of the temple. That fire never went out, because even when the sun disappeared below the horizon, the fire remained. Even when darkness settled over the city, life continued, just like your breathing, a quiet rhythm that carries on while you sleep. One you don't need to think about, one you don't need to control. How do you build a city in the middle of a lake? It's a fair question. Many people have asked it. Perhaps you're asking it right now. But the Aztecs would never have asked, because to them, it wasn't a matter of possibility. It was a divine command. You didn't question it. You simply obeyed. According to ancient legend, the people who would become the Aztecs, a tribe known as the Mexica, spent centuries wandering. They came from the north, from distant lands, from a mythical place called Aztlan. Exactly where Aztlan was located is still debated. Some point to northwestern Mexico. Others suggest somewhere even further north. But the where and the how were never really the point. What mattered was where they were going, and when they would finally be allowed to stop. It was a long journey, an exhausting one, uncertain in every direction. It lasted not years, but generations. One generation walked, and the next continued. No place was permanent. They passed through many lands, found none of them right, and kept moving. They built walls. They planted fields. They carried their gods with them, and they prayed everywhere they went. Their warrior god, Huitzilopochtli, had given them a sign to watch for. When they saw an eagle perched on a cactus, holding a serpent in its beak, that would be the place. That would be home. And one morning, in the year 1325, on a small island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, they saw it. An eagle, a cactus, a serpent. The wandering was over. Their feet at last were still. When they arrived, the island was small. It was marshy. Water surrounded it on every side. It was not beautiful at first glance. It did not seem well suited for farming. It did not look like the foundation of a great city. But the sign had been given, and those who had seen it had no choice but to stay. In the beginning, there were only a few families, a handful of shelters. They fished. They gathered plants along the water's edge. Life was difficult, but it was possible. And slowly, that small island began to grow. The Aztecs did not build against the water. They built with it. This is important to understand, because another people might have looked at that swamp and turned back. But the Aztecs did not see it as an obstacle. They saw it as an opportunity. They built the Chinampas. They drove long wooden stakes deep into the swamp. Over those stakes, they wove branches and reeds. On top of that, they piled mud and soil dredged from the lake bed. Over time, plant roots grew down through the layers and held everything in place. And so, fields emerged from the water. Not quite land, not quite lake, something in between, something that both supported life and grew alongside it. It is genuinely difficult not to be amazed. These Chinampas were extraordinarily productive. Lake water was always available. The soil was rich with minerals. Multiple harvests in a single year were possible. While other regions struggled with famine, this island had food in abundance. It did not run out. Over time, the island expanded dramatically. The Chinampas spread further. The city spread with them. Canals were dug. Bridges were built. By the late 15th century, Tenochtitlan had become one of the largest cities in the world. Estimates vary. Some sources place the population at around 200,000. Others suggest more than 300,000. Either figure was extraordinary for that era. London at the time was far smaller. So was Paris. Tenochtitlan stood among the greatest cities of its age, and all of it gathered, impossibly, in the middle of a lake. At the heart of the city lay a vast ceremonial plaza. Wide, stone-paved, open to the sky. Rising from the center of that plaza was the Templo Mayor, a great pyramid, stepped and towering, with two summits side by side. One peak was dedicated to Tlaloc, the god of rain, the other to Huitzilopochtli, the god of war. With each sunrise, one or both of those summits became the stage for ritual. The city was divided into 4 great quarters by its main canals. Each quarter had its own markets, its own temples, its own rhythm and sound. To move through the city was to cross water, to pass over bridges, to press through the noise and color of the marketplace. 3 great causeways connected the island to the surrounding land. Running north to south, east to west, these wide roads carried a constant flow of people every day. Merchants, soldiers, priests, envoys, each moving with purpose, each carrying the weight of their own world. But now it is night. The city is growing quiet. The canals are dark and still. A faint light filters down from the top of the temple. Distant, soft, barely there. The surface of the lake is calm. Stars reflect in the water below. There is no wind, only water and silence. Tenochtitlan is sleeping. And you, too, are settling now, like the first stones of the city meeting the water, slowly finding your place, growing heavier, growing still, a little more with every breath. The morning is early. The sun has not yet reached the center of the sky. Tenochtitlan is waking. A farmer walks to the edge of a canal. He carries a small wooden tool in his hand. He looks out over his Chinampa field. Was it cold last night? Are the plants holding up? He reaches down and touches the leaves. Gently. Then he leans toward the water and washes his face. Cold water. His eyes open fully. He straightens up, and the day begins. In Aztec society, everyone had a place. A clear, defined, largely unchanging place. Farmers, craftspeople, merchants, priests, warriors, nobles. Each lived a different life. Different food, different clothing, different homes, but all of them inside the same city, under the same sun, reaching toward the same gods. The home of an ordinary family was modest, built from adobe or stone, usually a single floor, a handful of rooms. Woven mats covered the ground. Sitting, eating, sleeping, all of it happened on those mats. Furniture was minimal. There was a stone hearth, a flat grinding stone called a matate, a clay water jar, a few bowls, perhaps a chest. That was all. Breakfast was simple. A warm maize porridge called a toll. Tortillas, sometimes beans, sometimes something seasoned with chili. The meal did not last long. The day started early. Maize was at the absolute center of Aztec life. This cannot be overstated. Maize was not simply food. It was sacred. Ceremonies were held in honor of Sinidal, the maize god. A poor harvest was a warning. An abundant one was a blessing. In the stories of creation, The gods shaped human beings from maize dough. The human body, in this understanding, came from maize. And if the maize were ever to disappear, so too would the people. And so every meal was a quiet act of gratitude. Every bite, a kind of ritual. The market of Tlatelolco, located in the northwestern part of the city. This was one of the largest markets in the world. When the Spanish first arrived and saw it, they were stunned. Bernal Diaz, a soldier who served under Hernan Cortez, wrote about it years later in his memoirs. He had never seen anything like it. The order of it, the variety, the market had everything. Cacao, gold, brilliant feathers, woven cloth, obsidian blades, clay vessels, live animals, medicinal herbs, dyes, grains, precious stones, animal fats, salt, dried fish, and more, much more. Everything had value, but there was no currency. There was exchange. Cacao beans functioned like money. A particular length of cloth was worth a certain number of cacao beans. An obsidian blade could be traded for something else. The system was intricate, but it worked. The market had order. Inspectors moved through the crowds. Officials checked weights and measures. Those who cheated were punished. Disputes were resolved quickly. At the center of this whole system were the Paktika, professional long-distance traders. They kept commerce moving, and they brought back knowledge from distant regions. A merchant was also, in a sense, a gatherer of information. For an Aztec child, life took shape from birth. Children attended school. Education in Aztec society was not optional. Every child, whether noble or common, went. Children of the nobility attended the Calmacac, a school attached to the temples, run by priests. Students rose before dawn. They bathed in cold water. They fasted. They learned to read and write. They studied the calendar. They learned astronomy, history, poetry, and religious ceremony. Life there was strict, but those who passed through it emerged with knowledge. Children of ordinary families attended the Telpakali. There, the focus was different. Combat training, craftsmanship, community duties, agriculture, more physical, more demanding in a practical sense. But no child was left without learning. As evening came, the city slowed. Markets closed. The canals emptied. Fires were lit inside homes. The smell of food drifted through the air. Children were called indoors. For the Aztecs, night was a different kind of time. Darkness belonged to the gods and the dead. Being outside after nightfall was not something people did lightly. Mats were spread across the floor. The fire burned low, and from outside came the sound of the lake. Sometimes a bird, sometimes a wind, sometimes nothing at all. That was how an ordinary day in Tenochtitlan ended. Heavy, steady, repeating. Each day shaped like the one before it. And now you are moving into that steadiness too. Everything is slowing. Thoughts are becoming fewer. Everything is growing heavier. Just like those who lay down on their mats long ago and let the night take them. In some traditions, he was one who had died and would one day return. And when that day came, great changes would follow. Zyp Totek, the god of seasonal renewal, of the seed pushing up through the soil, a herald of spring. His rituals were difficult to witness, but they were understood as necessary. The price of nature's renewal. The old falls away so the new can emerge. The cycle had to continue. Mictlantecutli, lord of the dead, ruler of the underworld, skeletal in form, silent, seated in permanent expectation. He called everyone eventually, and he turned no one away. Temples were not simply places of worship. They were the homes of gods. Each temple represented a direction, a force, a presence. Each ceremony corresponded to a season, a day in the calendar, a turning point in the cosmic order. To build a temple was not merely to stack stone. It was to establish a connection with the universe itself. The Templo Mayor was rebuilt 7 times over the centuries. Each time a new emperor rose to power, he enlarged it. A new layer was added over the old one. And so the temple grew slowly over generations, like the rings of a tree. Each layer, a different era. Today, when archaeologists carefully uncover those layers, They are reading time in reverse. The interior of the temple was dark, narrow passages, dim chambers. The walls were painted, red and black dominated. These colors represented blood and obsidian, life and death. The two were inseparable. The lives of the priests were woven entirely into the temple. They did not cut their hair. They rose in the middle of the night to pray. They fasted, at times. They inflicted pain upon themselves. This severe discipline was understood as a form of devotion, a way of demonstrating that the self had been given over entirely to the divine. But the temple did not belong only to the priests. Ordinary people came too. Offerings were left. Flowers, food, cacao, incense. To leave something for a god was to speak to that god directly. And sometimes the god answered. A rain, a harvest, a victory. Sometimes there was no answer, and that silence carried the heaviest weight of all. Now it is night. At the summit of the Templo Mayor, a single flame burns. Flickering. Below, the city sleeps. The lake is still and dark. A priest sits alone, waiting, one last breath before the sun returns. And you are in that same moment now, just before sleep, at the center of the silence, suspended in the space between. Can you carve time into stone? The Aztecs did. There is a great circular stone standing today in the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City, nearly 4 meters across, 24 tons, covered in carved symbols, concentric rings, faces, and numbers. Millions of people have stood before it, looked at it, gone quiet. It is commonly, and somewhat incorrectly, called the Aztec calendar stone, but it is not simply a calendar. It is a document of the cosmos, a record of time, of a universe, and of humanity's place within it, a kind of encoded message left in stone. At the center is a face. Some scholars identify it as Tonatiuh, the sun god. Others offer different interpretations. But the face is there at the center of everything, and everything revolves around it, as everything in the Aztec understanding revolved around the sun. The Aztecs used 2 calendars. The first was the Zayapowali, the solar calendar of 365 days. It divided the year into 18 months, each containing 20 days. 18 times 20 gives 360. To that, 5 additional days were added at the year's end. These were called the Nemontemi. They were considered unlucky. No important work was undertaken. No campaigns were launched. Children born during these days were not named immediately. People simply waited and prayed. The second was the Tanaupwali, a sacred calendar of 260 days. It combined 20 day names with 13 numbers in a continuous cycle. This calendar governed daily life. It determined which days were favorable for marriage, for travel, for visiting the temple. It told you what the day permitted and what it did not. And most significantly, it shaped the meaning of a person's birth. The day you were born determined which god watched over you. Your name was drawn from this calendar. To be born on a favorable day was to inherit a favorable destiny. To be born on a difficult day, the priest would intervene. The name might be adjusted. A ceremony would be performed. When these 2 calendars turned together, they realigned every 52 years, returning to the same combination of day and date. This span was close to a full human lifetime, and at the end of each such cycle, a ceremony was held. It was called the New Fire Ceremony, and the night before it, a deep fear settled over everything. Every fire was extinguished across the entire city, across the entire land. Hearts went dark. The temple flames went out. Everywhere, darkness. And everyone waited, in their homes, in silence. Because if the new fire could not be lit, the world would end. The sun would not rise. The darkness would be permanent. On a high hill called Huixaclan, priests watched the sky. When the Pleiades reached their highest point overhead, the first fire was kindled, struck from wood, coaxed into flame. From that fire, torches were lit, and those torches moved outward, from torch to torch, village to village, city to city, until light had returned to every corner of the land. The fire was reborn, and life continued for another 52 years. Time for the Aztecs, was not a line. It was a circle, a cycle, something that returned, repeated, and renewed itself. Beginning and ending were not opposites. They were the same point. Every ending was also a beginning. This idea has a way of settling into the mind slowly, because once you are inside a cycle, it becomes difficult to find where it starts or where it stops. Everything flows forward. Everything comes back. And a person is only one small part of that turning. Just like sleep, the same every night, and different every night. But it always returns. It always comes. Always. Now, hold that great stone in your mind for a moment. Close your eyes and let it take shape. Large, circular, immensely heavy. Its cool surface, time itself carved into it. Every symbol a day. Every ring a cycle. And all of it turning. Quietly, without pause, without fatigue. Just like you're breathing. In Aztec society, the highest honor was won on the battlefield. But this kind of warfare was unlike what we think of today. The goal was not simply to kill. It was to capture, to bring back a living enemy. Unharmed, healthy, strong, because the gods required offerings. And the most valued offering was one taken alive in battle. A warrior taken alive in battle, not a lifeless body. A living, breathing, resisting human being. And so Aztec warfare carried a strange kind of tension within it. Violence alongside ceremony. Death alongside code. This was known as the Flower War. Zakieo. At times, arrangements were made in advance with an opposing people. On an agreed day, in an agreed place, warriors from both sides would meet. The objective was not simply to kill. It was to capture. The more prisoners you brought back, the greater your honor. The more you gave up, the deeper the shame. The Aztec warrior carried specific weapons. The macuahuitl, a wooden club with obsidian blades embedded along its edges. Obsidian was among the sharpest materials found in nature. When fractured cleanly, it could hold an edge finer than a surgical blade. With this weapon, a warrior could slash and strike. It was dangerous at close range and at a distance. There was the Tlatelolco, a handheld spear thrower that could launch a projectile much farther and with greater force than an arm alone. There were bows and arrows, and there were shields, made from wood or woven material, decorated with feathers and paint. Some shields were themselves works of art. But beyond any weapon, a warrior's most essential possession was his reputation. How many prisoners had you taken? Which battles had you fought in? Which titles had you earned? These questions shaped everything. They determined where you stood. A warrior who captured his first prisoner became visible within society. A second brought a new title. A third, another. Each captive was a step upward. And to reach the highest levels, to enter the most elite ranks, a warrior needed many. The Eagle Warriors, Cuautli, among the most distinguished military orders. They fought wearing eagle helmets and costumes. The carved head of an eagle above their own, eagle feathers covering their bodies. The eagle represented the sun that climbed the morning sky and descended in the evening. Eagle warriors were the sun's representatives on earth. The other great order was the jaguar warriors, Ocelotl. They wore suits covered in jaguar skin, with the head of a jaguar over their own. The jaguar was the animal of the night, a symbol of darkness, of stealth, of the art of the hunt. Jaguar warriors were masters of night operations and ambush. Between these two orders, a quiet and constant rivalry existed. Who had taken more prisoners? Who had fought in greater battles? The reliefs carved into temple walls depicted these warriors. Their names were inscribed in stone. They were made permanent. But the life of a warrior was a heavy one. Constant readiness was required. The body had to be kept strong. Sleep, food, every aspect of daily life was subject to discipline. And every battle carried with it the real possibility of death. What happened if a warrior died in battle? This was considered the most honorable death of all, to die in combat or as a sacrificial offering. These people became the sun. With the first light of morning, they rose into the sky. For 4 years, they traveled alongside the sun. And after that, they were transformed into butterflies, into hummingbirds. They would drift above sweet flowers forever. An ordinary death was different. To die of illness or old age was to enter a darker road. A long journey toward the land of the dead began, difficult, uncertain. But the death of a warrior was celebrated. It was mourned and honored at the same time. This belief made warriors fearless, because the worst thing was not death. The worst thing was to die without meaning. Now it is night. Along the canals of Tenochtitlan, an eagle warrior walks. The battle is over. He has taken a prisoner. He is tired, but his honor is intact. His steps are heavy but steady. He moves in the direction of the temple. Around him, silence. Only the sound of water. Only the sound of his own footsteps. And you, too, feel heavy now, but peaceful, tired but complete. Another day has ended. Everything is as it should be. The Emperor, Tlatelolco, the great speaker. This was the title given to the ruler of the Aztecs. Tlatelolco, literally, the one who speaks. He spoke, and it was done. He did not speak, and it was not. Montezuma II, or more precisely, Moctezuma Tlayutzin, the younger Montezuma. He came to power in 1502. He presided over what many consider the empire's most brilliant period, right up until the arrival of the Spanish. He held both religious and political authority. He was the representative of the divine and the supreme commander of the military at once. Montezuma's palace stood at the very heart of Tenochtitlan. It faced the ceremonial plaza. It sat directly beside the great temple. But this palace was not a single building. It was a city unto itself. It consisted of multiple structures, connected by passages, each section serving a different purpose. Some accounts describe several hundred rooms within its walls. One section was reserved for guests, envoys from distant regions, allied leaders, governors arriving with tribute. All were received here. Another section belonged to the advisors, where the affairs of state were discussed and decided. Another housed the palace staff, cooks, attendants, gardeners, guards. There were gardens, wide, carefully ordered and green. Rare plants were cultivated there, medicinal herbs, exotic flowers, cacao trees, things brought from far regions, gathered in one place. There was a zoo, jaguars in large enclosures, eagles, serpents, pumas, remarkable birds of many kinds, even albino animals. Montezuma's collection held living creatures from across the known world. Each had its keepers, its caretakers, its own prepared diet. There was a pool. Colorful fish moved through the water. Water birds rested on its surface. Stone paths ran along its edges. Those who lived within the palace would walk here, quietly, slowly. Montezuma's daily life followed a precise and detailed order. He rose in the morning. First, prayer, then bathing. Physical cleanliness held great importance among the nobility. They bathed twice a day, a habit that was extraordinarily rare in the Europe of that era, but entirely ordinary for the Aztecs. His morning meal was substantial. Hundreds of dishes were prepared in his kitchens. Meats, vegetables, maize preparations, fruit, insects. Yes, insects. The Aztecs consumed certain insects as a rich source of protein. Chapulines, a type of grasshopper, are still found in Mexican cuisine today. And cacao. Montezuma was said to drink it regularly. Frothed, sometimes sweetened, sometimes bitter, sometimes blended with various spices. It was served in gilded or painted vessels. When he ate, he withdrew behind a screen. No one could watch him. To observe the emperor eating was considered disrespectful. He existed in proximity to the divine. To look directly upon the divine was dangerous. That distance had to be maintained. The afternoons were given to the affairs of state. His advisors came. Tribute records, military reports, news arriving from distant regions. The Aztec Empire stretched across a vast territory, centered on a valley of Mexico, covering much of what is now modern Mexico. Hundreds of cities paid tribute. Tracking those payments, maintaining order across such distances, required enormous organization. The evenings brought entertainment. Musicians played. Dancers performed. Jesters took the floor. Poets recited their work. But this was not idle amusement. These too were ceremonies dedicated to the gods. every dance a ritual, every piece of music a kind of prayer. And at night, the palace grew quiet gradually. Montezuma slept, but even sleep existed within structure. Guards stood at the doors. Sentinels moved through the gardens. Everything was in order. Everything was in its place. In a great empire, in a great palace, a small room, and there, on a simple woven mat, the most powerful man in that world slept, just like everyone else. Because sleep is a great equalizer. The one who sits on a throne and the one who works in the fields enter the same silence, the same darkness, the same stillness. And now, you're inside that stillness too. Ships were coming from the east. The Mexican people knew the sea. There were fishermen. There were coastal traders. But these ships were different. They were large, very large, and the people aboard them resembled nothing anyone had ever seen. The first reports reached Tenochtitlan, carried by runners. The messengers described what they had witnessed. Men wearing armor that shone like silver, faces pale in complexion, strange hair growing across their cheeks and jaws. And they were seated on animals, enormous animals, unlike anything known. These creatures were called horses. From a distance, the man and the animal appeared to be a single being. They carried weapons. Weapons that made a tremendous noise. A sound like thunder. And people fell. What did Montezuma think? We cannot know with certainty. The records from that moment are incomplete. Some sources say he believed Cortez be Quetzalcoatl, the god returning as had been foretold. Perhaps the time had come. Some modern historians reject this account entirely. They argue it was a narrative constructed after the fact, that Montezuma recognized Cortez as an ordinary threat and responded accordingly. What is the truth? We do not know. Perhaps both versions hold something real. Perhaps neither does. Montezuma sent envoys. He sent gifts, gold, feathers, precious cloth, objects associated with the symbols of Quetzalcoatl. Perhaps it was a test. Perhaps it was a genuine welcome. Perhaps it was simply a way of buying time. But the gifts did not turn them back. Hernán Cortés had come from Cuba. He was ambitious, sharp-minded, and stubborn. He had set out without official authorization, leaving behind both a past and a career. Ahead of him lay an unknown continent. He marched with a small force, around 500 soldiers, 16 horses, a handful of cannons. With these, toppling a great empire seemed impossible. But Cortés was not alone. Along the way, he found allies. There were peoples living under Aztec rule who had grown to resent it deeply. The Tlaxcalans. For years, they had paid tribute to the empire. They had given up their warriors as prisoners. They had been waiting for a moment like this. Cortés made them an offer. Fight alongside us. Free yourselves from the Aztec yoke. They accepted, and that alliance changed everything. Because what had seemed like an impossible march, a few hundred soldiers against one of the most powerful empires in the world, suddenly became something else entirely. Cortés now had thousands of experienced fighters at his side. Men who knew the land. Men who knew their enemy. Men with generations of grievance behind them. Among Cortés's most important assets was a woman known as La Malinche. Her true name was Malintzin. She had been given Cortés as a slave, offered along with other gifts by a coastal people early in his journey. She spoke Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs, as well as a Mayan dialect. Within a short time, she had also learned Spanish, and so she became a bridge between two worlds. She translated Cortés's words. She translated Montezuma's words. Perhaps something was lost in those translations. Perhaps something was changed, deliberately or not. But without her, this encounter would have unfolded very differently, if it had unfolded at all. November 1519. Cortés and his forces reached the edge of Tenochtitlan. What they saw stopped them. Even men who had crossed an ocean and marched through jungles and fought multiple battles fell silent when the city came into view. A vast island metropolis rising from the water, causeways stretching across the lake, pyramids visible from a great distance, tens of thousands of people moving through the streets. Nothing in Europe, nothing in their experience, had prepared them for this. Montezuma came out to meet them. He was carried on a golden litter, lifted above the ground. He wore specially made sandals for the occasion, because an emperor did not place his feet directly on bare earth. Before him, attendants laid down a path of woven mats and feathers, so that his steps touched only what had been prepared for him. Two men came face to face. Two worlds came face to face. What passed between them was filtered through translation, through ceremony, through the assumptions each man carried about the other. Perhaps they understood each other. Perhaps they did not. Perhaps each saw in the other only what he had already decided to see. But the moment itself was real. That day, the people of Tenochtitlan watched from the streets and the rooftops, some with curiosity, some with unease, some with no particular feeling at all. Strangers had arrived. They told one another. Strangers passed through. But these ones did not leave. A siege closed around the city. Cortez had withdrawn once before, forced out in a single desperate night that his men would later call the Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. They had fled across the causeways in darkness, under attack, losing men and gold and weapons to the water. It had been a catastrophe. But Cortez had not broken. He had regrouped. He had reinforced. And now he had returned. This time, the force was entirely different in scale. The Tlaxcalans marched with him, committed and numerous. Other peoples who had suffered under Aztec dominance had joined as well. And in the months before the return, Cortez had done something remarkable. He had ordered the construction of ships, not ocean vessels, but flat-bottomed brigantines, built in pieces inland, carried in sections over mountains, and assembled at the edge of Lake Texcoco. These ships could move across the lake, intercept Aztec canoes, and cut off the city from the water. The siege began in the spring of 1521. The three great causeways, the only land routes connecting the island to the shore, were seized and held. Cortez placed his forces at each one, blocking movement in and out. The freshwater aqueduct that supplied Tenochtitlan was severed. Clean water stopped flowing into the city. Food shipments ceased. What had once been a place of abundance, a city that fed hundreds of thousands, began to starve. And then there was a disease. Smallpox had arrived on the ships from Europe, invisible, traveling in the bodies of men who had survived it and barely thought of it. But the people of Tenochtitlan had never encountered it. They had no inherited resistance, no prior exposure, nothing to slow it down. It moved through the city, silently, from house to house, from family to family. Entire neighborhoods fell ill at once. The healers had no answer for it. The priests had no ritual to stop it. It simply spread. Montezuma was already dead by this point. The circumstances of his death remain disputed to this day. Some Spanish sources claim he was struck by stones thrown by his own people, that when he appeared before them and urged submission, the crowd turned on him. He had been seen cooperating with the strangers. He had allowed himself to be held. To many, this looked like betrayal. Other sources suggest the Spanish killed him directly. The truth has never been settled. After Montezuma came Tlatelolco, who took power in the chaos and immediately organized fierce resistance. But he survived only 80 days before smallpox took him too. Then came Cuauhtémoc, the last emperor, young, resolute, unwilling to yield. He understood what was happening. He understood what the end might look like, and he chose to fight anyway. Cuauhtémoc defended the city street by street. Every district was contested, every canal, every bridge. Aztec warriors fought with what they had. Macuahuitl against steel, determination against artillery. Sometimes wounded, sometimes starving, but holding on with a resistance that seemed to come from somewhere beyond strategy or calculation. But as the weeks passed, the siege wore everything down. There was no food left. The water that remained was contaminated. The dead could not be removed quickly enough. The streets that had once carried merchants and priests and children now held the sick and the dying in growing numbers. The canals, those same canals that had made the city a wonder, had turned dark. The smell that drifted through the air was no longer incense or cooking fires. It was something heavier, something final. August 1521, the last day. Cuauhtémoc tried to escape by canoe. He pushed out onto the lake in the early hours. trying to cross to the far shore. Perhaps he believed he could regroup there. Perhaps he thought there were still people willing to fight, still a way to continue. He had refused to surrender when the walls were closing in. He refused now, but he was spotted. A Spanish brigantine moved to intercept him. His canoe was stopped on the water, and the last emperor of the Aztecs was taken alive. Tenochtitlan had fallen. That city, that extraordinary, impossible city built on water. The city that had risen from a small marshy island into one of the largest and most sophisticated urban centers the world had ever seen. Its canals, once full of movement and trade. Its causeways, once carrying thousands of people in both directions every day. Its great ceremonial plaza, where the Templo Mayor had stood for generations, rebuilt 7 times, layer upon layer, reaching higher with each emperor. Its markets, its gardens, its schools, its palaces, its zoo, all of it broken. The great temple was torn down. Its stones were removed and used in the construction of new buildings. Spanish buildings, Christian buildings, rising from the same ground where Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc had once been honored. The canals were filled in over time. The lake was slowly drained across the following centuries. The island became land. The water became city. Cortez built a new settlement directly over the ruins, and that settlement became Mexico City. Today, one of the largest cities on Earth stands on that same ground. Every year, when construction workers dig beneath its streets, they find Aztec remains, walls, artifacts, offerings, bones, because Tenochtitlan is still there underneath, silent, buried, patient. Cuauhtémoc was taken prisoner. He was subjected to torture. His captors wanted to know where the empire's gold had been hidden. He did not tell them. He endured what was done to him without yielding that information. He lived as a prisoner for several years before he was executed in 1525. Far from the city he had defended, but his story did not end there. In the centuries that followed, he became something larger than a historical figure. He became a symbol of resistance, of dignity in the face of overwhelming force, of the refusal to bend. Today, his image appears across Mexico, in murals, in monuments, in the names of streets and public spaces. He is remembered not as the man who lost, but as the man who never surrendered. And then there are the others, the ones without recorded names. The farmer who attended his Chinampa in the early mornings, touching the leaves, checking the water. The merchant who had known every corner of Tlatelolco, who had traded cacao and cloth and obsidian for years. The child who had been sent to school, who had learned the calendar, who had memorized the names of the gods. The priest who had climbed the temple steps before sunrise, who had watched the Pleiades, who had believed that the fire had to be kept alive. The mother, the soldier, the weaver, the poet. What did they think on that last morning? We do not know, but an Aztec lament composed in the years following the fall tried to hold what words could hold of that day. The canals ran red. The stones wept. The maize fields wept. A few simple lines. But inside them an entire world. Tonight, in this silence, think of that city. It no longer rises above the water. It no longer reflects the stars in its canals. But it is still there, beneath the ground, beneath the streets, beneath the weight of 5 centuries. Still present, still holding its shape in the dark. Waiting, quietly, the way all buried things wait. And you too are sinking slowly now. Downward, into stillness, into the quiet that belongs to the night. Let the city rest beneath you. Let the names and the faces dissolve. Let everything that was said tonight settle, like silt, like soil, to the bottom. You are still. You are here. And the darkness around you is not empty. It is full of everything that has ever been. Not everything disappears. Some things change form. Some things go into hiding. Some things press themselves into the earth and wait. But they do not vanish. Because everything that has truly lived leaves a mark. And that mark cannot be erased. It can only be buried deeper over time. The Aztec civilization did not end in 1521. What ended was an empire. What ended was a political structure, the tribute system, the line of emperors, the great ceremonies at the summit of the Templo Mayor. The Spanish colonial period brought new laws, a new religion, a new language of power. The old ways were suppressed. Codices, the painted books in which the Aztecs recorded their history, their calendars, their rituals, were burned in great numbers. An immeasurable amount of knowledge was lost in those fires. Gone in days, gone in hours, what had taken generations to accumulate. But culture does not burn as cleanly as paper. The people remained. The memories remained. And slowly, carefully, often in disguise, pieces of the old world survived inside the new one. The language continued. Nahuatl, the language spoken in Tenochtitlan, the language Montezuma used, the language in which the priests recited their prayers before sunrise, is still spoken today. Approximately 1.5 million people in Mexico know it. It is taught in some communities, passed from grandparents to grandchildren, kept alive through daily use in villages and towns where it has never fully stopped being spoken. And Nahuatl did something else. It quietly entered the languages of the world. Chocolate, the word comes from chocolatl, the frothy, rich, sometimes bitter drink made from cacao that Montezuma reportedly consumed every day. The Spanish encountered it, brought it back to Europe, and within generations it had spread across the continent. It was sweetened, it was modified, it was turned into something new, but the word it carried with it was Nahuatl. And today, in almost every language on earth, you can hear that ancient word when someone asks for something sweet. Tomato, from tomatl. Chili, from chili. Avocado, from aguacatl. Cacao, from cacahuatl. These words are used every day, in kitchens and markets and conversations all over the world, by people who have no idea they are speaking a fragment of an ancient language. No idea that the word in their mouth was once spoken in a city built on water, in a civilization that mapped the stars and carved time into stone. The history travels invisibly, tucked inside ordinary words, crossing borders and centuries without announcement. The stones also remained. The calendar stone, that vast circular disc nearly 4 meters across, weighing 24 tons, did not survive the conquest above ground. It was buried, hidden deliberately or by the disordered destruction, beneath the earth of what became Mexico City. And there it lay for more than 2.5 centuries, while colonial buildings rose above it, while the Spanish cathedral was constructed nearby, while generations were born and died on that same ground, without knowing what rested beneath their feet. Then, in 1790, workers digging in the central plaza of Mexico City struck something large and solid. They uncovered the stone carefully. It had waited 269 years underground. It emerged intact, the carvings still sharp, the face at the center still present, still surrounded by its rings of time and symbol. Today it stands in the National Museum of Anthropology, and millions of people have stood before it, looked at it in silence, felt something they perhaps could not name, the particular weight that comes from being in the presence of something ancient and real. That stone has outlasted every empire that has risen since it was carved, and it continues to say what it has always said. Time moves in circles. What has been will return. The Templo Mayor also came back. For centuries after the conquest, the exact location of the Great Pyramid was debated. It was known to be somewhere beneath the colonial city, beneath the streets and the buildings and the cathedral that the Spanish had built at the symbolic heart of the old Aztec world. But its foundations had not been found. The city had grown too dense, too layered, too built upon. Then, on a February morning in 1978, workers from an electricity company were digging beneath a street in the historic center of Mexico City. Their equipment struck stone. They cleared some of the earth away and found a carved disc, large, heavy, covered in elaborate relief. They stopped work and called for specialists. Archaeologists arrived. They identified the carved figure as Coyolxauhqui, the moon goddess, defeated and dismembered in Aztec mythology by Huitzilopochtli at the moment of his birth. This disc was known from ancient sources to have been placed at the base of the Templo Mayor, which meant the temple itself was directly below. Excavations began. Buildings were cleared. Streets were rerouted. And slowly, over years of careful work, the foundations of the Great Pyramid emerged from the earth, layer by layer. All 7 phases of construction, one inside the other, exactly as the ancient accounts had described, the oldest layers reaching back to the earliest days of the city, the later ones rising higher, added by each successive emperor who had wanted to leave his mark on the most sacred structure in the world he ruled. Today, the Templo Mayor Archaeological Zone is open to the public. You can walk its grounds. You can stand at the base of those ancient foundations and look up at where the twin peaks once stood, where the priests climbed in the darkness before dawn, where the fire burned through night, where offerings were made to gods who were believed to hold the sun in place. And directly beside it, sharing the same open sky, stands the Metropolitan Cathedral of Mexico City, built by the Spanish in the 16th and 17th centuries, built, in part, from the very stones of the temples they had torn down. The carved blocks of Aztec sacred architecture were taken and placed into Christian walls. The old world was used, literally, as material for the new one, and yet both still stand. The cathedral and the pyramid ruins, side by side, on the same ground, under the same light. Two worlds separated by 5 centuries of history, existing in the same space at the same moment. Neither one erasing the other completely. Neither one able to claim that ground entirely. This is what remains. Not triumph, not defeat. Something more complicated and more human than either of those words. A city beneath a city. A language inside other languages. A calendar in a museum. A stone disc found by accident in the ground. Pieces of something that was told it was finished and refused to be. And tonight, you have heard some of it. Not all of it. There is far too much for any single night. But some of it, the island, the eagle on the cactus, the fire that could not go out, the market full of everything the world had to offer, the warrior walking home along a dark canal, the emperor sleeping on a simple mat, the stones that kept the sun in place. All of it still here, in some form, in the words you use without knowing, in the ground beneath a modern city, in the memory of a people who were told to forget and did not. Let that settle now. Let it go quiet. You have carried these stories through the night, and they have carried you. Rest now. Everything that matters finds a way to remain. Cuauhtémoc was not yet 30 years old when he became emperor. He had watched everything unfold from within the city. He had seen the strangers arrive. He had seen Montezuma receive them, house them, offer them gifts. He had seen the tension build inside the palace walls. He had seen the massacre at the festival of Texcoco, when the Spanish soldiers cut down unarmed Aztec nobles during a sacred ceremony, an act that shattered whatever fragile peace had existed. He had seen the chaos of the Noche Triste, when the Spanish fled the city in darkness, and for a brief moment it seemed as though Tenochtitlan had survived. He had seen all of this, and when the time came for him to lead, he knew exactly what he was inheriting. Not an empire at its height, an empire under siege. Cuauhtémoc took power in 1520, after the death of Cuitlahuac. The city was already weakened. Smallpox had moved through the population with devastating speed. Entire families had been lost. The healers could do nothing. The priests could explain it only as a sign, a punishment, a turn in the cosmic order. But Cuauhtémoc did not wait for explanations. He began preparing. He reinforced the causeways. He positioned warriors at every entry point. He sent messengers to neighboring peoples, asking for support, reminding them of old alliances. Some came, many did not. The network that had once held the empire together had already begun to fray. Too many peoples had too many old grievances. Cortés had been careful and patient in building his coalition. By the time the siege began in earnest, Cuauhtémoc faced not only the Spanish, but a substantial portion of central Mexico standing against him. Still, he did not consider surrender. Inside the city, the mood shifted as the weeks passed. The causeways were held by enemy forces. The brigantines controlled the lake. The aqueduct had been cut. What water remained in the city came from wells and from what little rain fell. It was not enough. Food supplies dwindled quickly. The Chinampas, those remarkable floating gardens that had fed the city for 2 centuries, were either destroyed or unreachable. There was nothing coming in. Cuauhtémoc organized the defense street by street. He understood that the city's layout was both its greatest vulnerability and its greatest asset. The Spanish and their allies could advance, but every bridge could be destroyed behind them. Every canal could become a barrier. Every rooftop could become a position. The Aztec warriors used the city itself as a weapon, collapsing structures to slow the advance, retreating through narrow passages that cavalry could not follow, regrouping in districts that had not yet fallen. The Spanish found that taking Tenochtitlan was not like taking a field or an open hillside. It was slow, grinding, and costly. For every block they advanced, they sometimes lost it the following night. Cortés, frustrated by the pace, made a decision to demolish systematically, to tear down buildings as he advanced so that the rubble could not be retaken and used as cover. He began destroying the city in order to take it. This was the great irony of the conquest of Tenochtitlan. The city that Bernal Diaz had described with such stunned admiration, the canals, the towers, the markets, the ordered beauty of it, was being dismantled by the very people who had marveled at it. Inside the shrinking perimeter of Aztec control, the suffering deepened. There are accounts, written down years later by indigenous survivors and their descendants, that describe what those final weeks felt like from the inside. People eating whatever could be found, bark, leather, insects, roots. Drinking water that was no longer clean. The sick lying in the streets alongside the dead. The smell of the city changing completely. The sweetness of incense and cooking fires replaced by something no one wanted to name. And through all of it, Cuauhtémoc moved among his people. He did not retreat into a palace. He was present. He spoke to his warriors. He made decisions quickly and without visible hesitation. There are accounts of him appearing on the causeways, on the rooftops, directing the defense personally. He was by all descriptions, Spanish and indigenous alike, a figure of remarkable composure under conditions that would have broken most people. But composure cannot stop a siege indefinitely. By late July of 1521, the Aztec-controlled area of the city had shrunk to the northeastern district of Tlatelolco. The great market, which had once held tens of thousands of traders and shoppers on any given day, was now a staging ground for a last offense. The stalls were gone. The merchants were gone. The colorful noise and movement that Bernal Diaz had once found impossible to describe adequately, all of it gone. What remained was a population that had been reduced by battle and disease and starvation to a fraction of what it had been. Estimates suggest that tens of thousands had died during the siege alone, in a city that had once housed several 100,000 people. Cuauhtémoc held a final council with his remaining commanders. Some urged negotiation. They argued that the gods had spoken, that the signs were clear, that further resistance meant only further suffering for the people who remained. Cuauhtémoc listened, and then he said that he would not be the one to hand Tenochtitlan to the enemy. If the city was to fall, it would fall fighting. On the 13th of August, 1521, the end came. Cuauhtémoc attempted to leave the city by canoe, moving across the lake toward the far shore. Perhaps there was a plan. Perhaps there were people waiting. Perhaps he simply refused to be taken inside the city his family had ruled for generations. He was spotted on the water. A Spanish brigantine gave chase. The canoe was intercepted, and the last emperor of the Aztecs was lifted from the water and brought before Hernán Cortés. The accounts of that meeting describe Cuauhtémoc as composed and direct. He is said to have told Cortés that he had done everything a ruler could do to defend his people, and that having failed, he asked only to be killed. Cortés did not grant that request. Cuauhtémoc would be kept alive, useful as long as there was any possibility he knew where gold or other valuables had been hidden. The torture came shortly afterward. Hot coals applied to the feet, a method intended to make him reveal the location of Aztec treasure. He revealed nothing. When one of his companions, also being tortured, cried out and looked toward him, Cuauhtémoc is said to have replied with quiet steadiness, "Am I lying on a bed of flowers?" He endured. He said nothing that helped them. He lived for 4 more years as a prisoner, moving with the Spanish as they continued their campaigns across the region. In 1525, far from Tenochtitlan, Cortés had him executed, claiming he had been planning a rebellion. Whether this was true, no one can say with certainty. What is certain is that Cuauhtémoc died the way he had lived through those final terrible months, without surrendering. His body was buried somewhere along the road, in a location that was not recorded, or was recorded and then lost. For centuries, people searched for his remains. There are towns in Mexico that claim to hold them. None of the claims have been definitively confirmed. In some ways, this feels appropriate, because Cuauhtémoc was never really a body to be buried. He became something that does not require a grave. He became the memory of resistance itself. The idea that there are things worth protecting even when protection is impossible, that dignity is not the same thing as victory, that a person can lose everything and still not be defeated in the way that matters most. Today his face appears on Mexican currency. His statue stands in one of the great boulevards of Mexico City, not far from where Tenochtitlan once rose from the water. He looks out from the stone with the same composure that the accounts describe, neither triumphant nor broken, simply present, still here. And beneath the street where his statue stands, somewhere in the layered earth, the city he defended is still there too, quiet, patient, waiting in the dark, the way things wait, when they know they will not be forgotten. With every section, you grew a little heavier. With every sentence, you drifted a little further. Your mind slowed. Thoughts grew sparse. And now, perhaps, the words no longer carry meaning. There's only sound, only rhythm, only breath. This is exactly where you are supposed to be. The Aztecs believed the sun would rise again every morning. But morning required night. Darkness was not an obstacle. Darkness was a necessary moment. Without rest, the sun would tire. Without sleep, life could not continue. And so sleep was never an escape. Sleep was preparation. Sleep was the quiet work of building tomorrow. The lake is still. The city is sleeping. At the top of the temple, a single flame flickers in the distance, very far, very small. An eagle has folded its wings and waits for the wind to pass. In the Chinampa fields, the water is calm, the plants deep in their own rest. Everything is where it belongs. And you are waiting too, but not with thought anymore, with release. Take a slow breath in. Let it go. Once more. Let it go. And now simply be here. In your bed, your body heavy and warm, your mind quiet, your eyes too heavy to hold open. Tenochtitlan is beneath the earth now, but that beauty continues somewhere, in the stones, in the language, in the flowers that once floated on the surface of canals. And tonight, somewhere inside your sleep, that city is breathing softly. Good night.